Frampton on a yacht 40 years ago in Guatemala.
Well, their families were told their remains had been lost forever, and even the FBI couldn't find them. But new clues uncovered by BBC 5 Live investigation led Chris's sister to a remote graveyard with journalist Dan Maudsley.
At this cemetery in Guatemala, Penny Farmer is on a personal quest to solve a 40-year mystery. She's hoping to find the graves of her beloved brother Chris and his girlfriend, Peter Frampton. In late 1977, the graduates from Manchester set off on what should have been a trip of a lifetime, touring the world. But in Belize, they met American yachtsman Silas Dwayne Boston and his 2 young sons. The couple hired the skipper to take them touring, but soon after, the couple's families in Manchester received the terrible news that their bodies had been found drowned, bound and tied to engine parts off the coast of Guatemala. They were buried in the coastal town of Puerto Barrios. Chris and Peter's distraught families tried official channels to find out what happened, but Guatemala was in the grip of a civil war, hampering Greater Manchester Police's investigation. In 2015, Penny's attempts to trace Boston led to a breakthrough in the case. Police in California were able to take statements from Boston's sons, who told them they saw their father kill the couple. The FBI went to Guatemala, but despite a prolonged search, they were unable to find Chris and Peter's graves. But now, 40 years on, I'm accompanying Chris's sister Penny to do what the FBI couldn't, to find the bodies using a clue. A local pastor had written a letter describing where the graves were. I've been following Pastor Gary McCullough's letter that he wrote in 1984, describing coming to these graves, and everything anyone had told us was that they wouldn't be here, that we should give up hope. The FBI had searched here for a month. But just when all hope was lost, Penny's wait for the truth finally ended. It's there, right where he says in the letter.
Just extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, let's talk to Penny Farmer and the BBC reporter Dan Maudsley. They're both here in the studio. Thanks very much indeed for coming in, both of you. Penny, we saw you at the end of the report there in the graveyard in Guatemala. Do you feel that now you've got to the end of your quest, that you think you've found your brother's final resting place?
It ticked a lot of boxes, and it was, fantastic to find them. That it was mixed with a lot of sadness and elation. Mm. But as I came out of the cemetery, I was so angry that it was us who found them, or rather, an investigative journalist and not the law enforcement agencies. I think he's gone a very long way to solve a lot of our answers, to give us a lot of answers, but I think there's still more to come. So,
Dan, how come you found it when the FBI said they did an exhaustive investigation?
Well, that's part of the mystery that we are still looking into on the podcast. It's one of the several strange things about this case. What the FBI told us was that it was unfortunate, but that's partly why I think Penny was so angry, because actually there's been a lot of difficult things that we've investigated as part of this podcast. This is one of the more straightforward. We found the pastor who'd visited the graves before, and his details led us straight to the graves.
The podcast is called Paradise. It's available for people to download on BBC Sounds. It's 9 episodes, isn't it? So you've unpicked...
We've got a 10th now.
Oh, a 10th.
We've had new information.
Keep growing.
Yeah.
Penny, you know this story better than anybody. You wrote a book about it, which we've spoken to you about on this programme before. Yes. Did you learn any... I mean, you found the guy who you thought had done it. He died in prison before you were able to get justice.
Yes.
Have you found out anything new that you didn't already know?
Oh, so much. I mean, each week there's a new revelation. Dan has been very respectful and very sensitive in the way he's handled my family and Peter's family, and he's told us in advance. But just listening to each podcast, it has just brought out new information each week. The biggest one was that the case was closed in 1981 and we were never told, which was extraordinary.
And do you still have questions now, even having gone through this process, knowing you think who killed your brother, what happened, the sons who say they witnessed it, and now hopefully finding the grave?
Just this week, just today, Dan's received new information. It's just extraordinary, the way it's just coming in. People are listening to the podcast, reading the book, and coming forward. and it is extraordinary.
And it is, I'm sure, Dan, as a podcast maker, you look for astonishing stories, and, you know, poor old Penny and her family have had to live through this story, but it's an astonishing story.
Well, the story as it was presented to us at the start was an incredible story, and that's the story we thought we were going to tell. And it's only as we began investigating we realised there were so many more layers, so much more to the story, and gradually that's revealed itself.
Thank you both very much indeed for coming in. Dan Maudsley and Penny Farmer. The podcast, just to remind you again, it's called Paradise, and it's available to download on BBC Sounds.
Now, elsewhere, the BBC has learned that the authorities in Libya have agreed to extradite Hashem Abedi, who's the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber, but not until fighting in Tripoli, the Libyan capital, has stopped.